Thanks very much. It's nice to be here. So, as Stefan was saying in the introduction, I am largely in a teaching focused position, um, bringing ethics into the engineering curriculum at Cornell. But when I find time to squeeze in to write, I'm mostly thinking about artificial intelligence and ways in which it is affecting uh, society, people, the way we think about these technologies, the way that it gets taken up, and the impacts it has. um, but some of my earlier work was on now thinking about how to put responsibility into conceptual engineering. Think about who are the thinking subjects that are using the concepts or representational devices that we're talking about, and when we say things like thinking using this concept or conception is better than this one, what does that mean for people? Um, and so some of that is influencing what I'm about to say about how we are being encouraged to think about the things that we're calling artificial intelligence. And the scare quotes are on purpose because I think there's considerable ambiguity around what AI is and what it does, and that is providing space for some sketchy stuff that I'm going to talk about. Um, the I just want to start by saying this project is very early days. It's very much a work in progress. I'd be especially interested to hear, whether this, after hearing it, whether this seems like it's going somewhere useful, and whether there are other people working on similar kinds of ideas in different literatures I haven't explored yet. Okay, so part of the inspiration for this project comes from the career of James Randi, who was a Canadian American stage magician and escape artist. And he spent much of the latter part of his career investigating and debunking psychics and supernatural healers. And he was always careful to say he wasn't opposed in principle to the possibility that something supernatural could be happening. He was always open to that being the case, but the reason why he undertook these investigations was, as a magician, he was familiar with the kinds of techniques of misdirection, leading questions, sleight of hand that make stage magic compelling. In other words, a whole set of illusion techniques. And he noticed that faith healers and psychics and other people who purported to have supernatural powers very often were using precisely the same techniques to mislead people. So this quote is from a TED talk that he gave in 2010, where he says that they are using exactly the same methods as magicians to mislead people, to pull lots of money from them, um, and harming them in the process, because these are usually vulnerable people who feel they have very few other options, who are turning to so-called supernatural uh, adepts to help them with their problems. And so he thought it was important that we think more critically about this, apply a scientific lens to it, see if there's anything actually happening there. It'd be great if there was. But very often, the point was to show, these techniques are exploiting vulnerable people. So what does this have to do with AI? Well, um, I think, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, that some of these same illusion techniques are um, being used by technologists. And this was noticed in this paper by Nolan and Amanda Sharkey in 2006. They are roboticists at Sheffield. And they note how there's this long continuity between AI development and techniques of illusion, and that a lot of the reason why different kinds of AI or robotics seem compelling is because they rely on illusion techniques. To the point where they say AI researchers are sometimes swept up in their own illusions. They don't realize that they're being fooled by their own natural magic, they call it, which is what they use to a term they use to refer to um, different techniques of illusion that are used in religion and other kinds of ritualistic practices to make them more effective, essentially. Um, so it's almost 20 years later, and where are we at when it comes to AI and illusion? Well, so here's one takeaway from the project so far. I think AI has been and always is a kind of illusion, or at least it involves it in many different cases. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's currently a very bad thing. And that's because there is some malicious conceptual, or either malicious or I don't want to be too accusatory. It could be like accidental, like Sharky and Sharky were saying. Sometimes the technologists can get swept up in their own mythology. But I think there's a kind of conceptual engineering that's happening in the wild that is directing us to think about what we call artificial intelligence in a particular kind of way, such that these techniques of illusion are more compelling and can put us in vulnerable positions. So here's the outline of um, the rest of what I want to talk about. Um, First, I want to introduce this notion of conceptual muddle from computer ethics. It's kind of anticipating uh, the way that we talk about the work of conceptual engineering in a lot of important ways. Um, and then to show how the way that we are being encouraged to think about, represent AI as something magical or divine. Going to go through a number of different examples that I take to be representative of a broader trend. Um, and then I want to conclude by talking about what the ethics of illusion might be, because if stage magic is ethically permissible, there have to be kinds of illusion that are fine. So, where I want to go with this is it's not necessarily a bad thing if we think about AI as a sort of magic, um, but there are important provisos on that for it to be something permissible, for this to be the conception that we settle on for thinking about these technologies. All right. So I want to start by talking about computer ethics as a field of philosophy. In a paper from the late 80s, James Moore, who is one of the early voices in philosophical computer ethics, writes about how part of the point of doing ethics about computing technologies is a kind of conceptual engineering project. He writes that when we have new kinds of technologies, such as those that computers enable, they can create radically new possibilities for action. And that means that not only that we need new norms to govern these new kinds of activities, or we need to figure out how our existing norms apply, but sometimes we need to think about how we should even conceptualize what we're talking about. Are there conceptual frameworks that already exist that we can apply to them? Or do we need to come up with new schemata to capture something that is genuinely a new thing that we could be doing using these technologies? So here's an example. Circa 1989, computer hacking was relatively new as a threat because networked computers were just starting to move out from military applications. And there was a lot of serious discussion about what concept should we use to think about hacking? Um, what is it most like? Is it like breaking and entering? Is it like burglary? Is it espionage, snooping? Is it just harmless entertainment that can also be educational for the person who's doing the hacking? Is it a helpful security service for people to hack into systems and then inform people about their vulnerabilities? To some extent, these different conceptions of hacking are still informing public debate around it, but we are kind of settling in our regulatory frameworks and in our ways of thinking about this um, on different preferred conceptions, especially in different communities. So there's still some hackers out there who see what they do as a helpful security service, um, but it is now increasingly treated as a kind of crime that is akin to breaking and entering in some ways and akin to espionage in some ways, but depending a little on the context. Um, the point being, for the idea of conceptual engineering and computer ethics is that there was a point in time where it was genuinely unclear how we should think about computer hacking. And we had to do something like conceptual engineering to sort this out. So just to add on to that a little bit, so people in this audience will be familiar probably with Herman Capellan's work on conceptual engineering. Um, and the way he talks about it is that it's the process of assessing and improving our representational devices. So if you're thinking about computer hacking, we're trying to um, precisify our concept. We're trying to make it more useful for thinking about whether this is criminal or not. And we're trying to improve it for different kinds of purposes, legal or epistemic. Um, but conceptual engineering can be used just as much for ill as it can for good. So I think when we talk about conceptual engineering, we should be a little bit broader than this, and we shouldn't um, uh, interpolate some kind of value into the idea of modifying our representational devices. Because it's not just about improving them, whether that's for an ethical reason or an epistemological reason, because we intentionally modify our representational devices all the time for all kinds of different reasons. So here's a stark example of where this can be a bad thing. During the Second World War, the German philologist Victor Klemperer kept some detailed notes about his experiences during the Nazi regime, and then his efforts to help rebuild the country and uh, help its people recover afterwards. And some of these notes became this book on the language of the Third Reich. And in it, he talks about how Nazi language twisted the way that people thought about different aspects of life in ways that were useful for the regime. In the introduction, he talks about how um, this was especially noticeable and disturbing to him when it came to the concept of heroism. So he talks about working in an adult education session and a cultural discussion group, um, working with young adults who had been educated during the Nazi regime, and they were trying to, talk about civics essentially. And the idea was, we need to educate people to the point where they view democracy as something that is like the way to organize society. And he noted that they were making lots of progress in these discussions. People seemed to be getting it. But then, as soon as the concept of what a hero is came up, people reverted to these patterns of thinking that came directly out of Nazi propaganda. So people started always continued to construe the hero as a bloodthirsty conquering soldier or a reckless auto racer or a tank driver crushing everything in its path. Those are the three kind of images that he refers to. But it's a very particular notion of what a hero is. And for Klemperer, that obscured who the real heroes of the Second World War were. That is, those who stood up to tyranny and sheltered those that the regime was trying to destroy. So that's an example of how conceptual engineering doesn't have to be about improving concepts. It just has to be about changing concepts for some particular purpose. Um, and the effects of that can persist pretty strongly, even when social circumstances shift. Um, and another thing to add to this is a lot of the time, concept when conceptual engineering is being done in this kind of way to make people think in a certain sort of way to serve someone's ends, uh, it's very often useful for them to pull from historical conceptions where there's some kind of continuity of practice or thought um, that make it easier for these ways of thinking to latch on. So, in the Nazi example, they were referring to, notions of a glorious past for the German people. Um, and other kinds of far right movements today make similar kinds of references to ways of thinking about the kinds of people they see as heroes or the kinds of structures of society they prefer that refer back to older ways of thinking, not always entirely explicitly, but in a way that is intended to kind of activate these like social scripts or schemata or whatever you prefer to call it, um, that are already kind of in the zeitgeist, in the culture, and they're waiting to be exploited. So, what does this have to do with AI? Well, I think we're in the middle of some conceptual engineering around how to think about what AI is. Um, and we're currently in what James Moore would call a conceptual muddle, because AI refers to a widely diverse range of technologies that are used in a wide range of applications, some of which are fictional, some of which are real. The underlying technologies vary a lot, whether we're talking about um, like logical systems that operate sort of like a complicated flowchart, or we're talking about machine learning systems that take in tons of data and identify patterns within them. Um, and then the range of applications is vast. So the kinds of things that we're talking about is just impossibly ambiguous when we just talk about AI. And that creates the kind of confusion around, what is this thing and what does it do and how should we like what norms should apply to it? Um, and that confusion allows technologists to engage in a kind of conceptual engineering in a way that suits their purposes. It allows them to capture the discussion of these technologies and emphasize the mystery surrounding them in ways that suit their business purposes. And I think the general pattern, or one general pattern at least, that um, happens over and over again is that we are encouraged to think about AI as a kind of magic. And there's many different types of magic that get invoked that I'll talk about. All of which, or many of which at least, make use of those historical connections that I was just referring to. Many of the practices that make AI seem compelling rely on types of illusion that are associated with practices of magic or divinity um, that have ancient histories that persist in various religious subcultures today. So let's get a little more specific then. So one connection is between AI and stage magic. Um, so there's a very long history of using machines with an appearance of life and intelligence for entertainment. in histories of robotics, we often talk about how ancient engineers made quite sophisticated automata that ran usually on hidden hydraulic systems. This diagram is something that was made by Hero of Alexandria, um, and his writings describe a number of different inventions that try to create lifelike movement using hydraulic mechanisms. This particular one is of Heracles fighting a dragon, and the Heracles automaton will hit the dragon over the head with its club, and then the dragon will shoot water at him. And it just goes on like that. He talks, and Hero describes all kinds of other, even more complex devices, including one that could do an entire short stage play using these automata who would come in, move, and then move off the stage. There's other examples of this kind from the ancient and medieval world. Um, so what's happening here is there's a representation of living things, of intelligent behavior that is artificial, that is being used for entertainment purposes. And the illusion of um, real behavior here is what makes these things fascinating to look at, what makes them entertaining in the first place. Um, and the comparison with AI today and stage magic is that both are using a kind of hidden mechanism to trick us just for a moment that we're seeing something astonishing or impossible. Um, the illusion of this Heracles automaton relies on the fact that the hydraulics are all hidden from the viewer. They're all inside the figurines or in a box underneath. Um, Magic tricks on the stage also rely on you not seeing how the trick is performed in order for you to find it compelling. And that's often what generative AI is doing. There's a hidden mechanism and there's a surprise. And that captures the imagination and makes you wonder, how could this be possible? If you don't know how the trick is done, you're left curious, you're open to the possibility that there's something astonishing that's just happened. When you do know how the trick works, it could still be impressive and entertaining, but you're less likely to be fooled into thinking that there's something more going on here. Um, it is tempting sometimes when you generate something with Dolly or ChatGPT into thinking that, maybe there's some reasoning going on, maybe there's some creativity going on, um, because that's just, the way that we try to reason about these kinds of surprises. But in the background, there's some technical system that is responsible for this. Um, and this kind of illusion often gets hyped up even further when we're talking about using generative AI. So this is a blog post from a company that provides services to Amazon Web Services customers. Um, and you get 2 for 1 on buzzwords in here between metaverse and generative AI. Um, they're talking about like using this to blur the lines between fiction and reality. And that is, a kind of quintessential sort of magical practice of making it hard to tell what's real and what's not, and maybe the fantastical is itself what's real. So this is the first way in which um, AI and magic are developed in a kind of continuous way, and that we're encouraged to think about AI in magical ways. Here's another. So there's a lot of religious talk in AI spaces. And Adrian Mayer, who's a classicist in this book, Gods and Robots, writes about how ancient Greek mythology and religion make use of all kinds of techniques of artificial life to demonstrate the power of the gods. And she talks about how in myth and historical record, for example, there were statues that were purportedly so lifelike that they provoked a sense of awe, a sense that an act of creation backed by divinity was happening. Um, and so there's a similar sort of way of talking about creating artificial life that invokes sort of divine language. So a kind of stark example of this is this rambling interview that Elon Musk gave to the New York Times last year, where apropos of nothing, he says, these lawsuits about generative AI and intellectual property, where artists, for example, are claiming that their work has been stolen or and misappropriated for creating these technologies. Out of nowhere, Musk says, these lawsuits aren't relevant because soon we'll have a digital god, and it's not really clear what it was he was talking about. But this isn't just an Elonism. It There's a lot of serious scholarly work, serious discussion in the technology spaces around how we might soon have a superintelligence or some other kind of entity that we could describe as divine that emerges from AI work. This is also central to writings about, say, the singularity, which presents a kind of messianic notion that there's a savior that's coming. It's just instead of uh, uh, a divinity that's part of human religious traditions, it is instead something that will emerge from the machine. Um, and all of this talk again is part of encouraging us to think about AI as something continuous with the divine. And again, it leans on this long history of magic, illusion, and religion being connected with artificial life. Here's another kind of magical practice, divination. This is the practice of deriving meaning from random patterns, particularly when trying to predict the future. There's all kinds of things that people have done over the years that people still do. Today, people do things like drawing tarot cards. In ancient Rome, a very important method of divination was to have an expert look at how birds were flying around. This is called the augury. And they were taken extremely seriously by the ruling class. This painting from the 17th century shows King Tarquin the Elder consulting an augur who's providing guidance on the basis of these doves that are flying around. And this is, I think, supposed to be about helping Tarquin to make a military decision. Um, and a way of there are lots of projects using AI that purport to predict the future in different kinds of ways. Um, so this is a recent example from a blog at Northeastern University talking about a group of researchers who have created an AI tool that takes in some life events from, your personal history, and then it purports to be able to predict your personality, to when you're going to die and how, to what kind of what kind of life you might lead in different kinds of ways. Um, so this is not some fringe thing within the tech sphere. There are serious researchers who are claiming that we can use what are essentially uh, random processes that are weighted towards pattern recognition to predict the future, not just make uh, not just to make helpful advice the way some AI tools are presented, but to be able to tell you what the future holds for you. And in this way, they're falling into the same pattern of conflating AI and magic, just with this other occult practice. So here's another. Demonology is the practice of summoning a supernatural spirit and binding it to your will to perform fantastic things. You can think about, say, the story of Dr. Faustus, summoning Mephistopheles and then going on a wild escapade. This is a very common kind of magical practice across the world. This illustration is from a 17th century grimoire called the Lesser Key of Solomon that describes 72 demons you can call upon to do things like transmute metals into gold or learn different languages, afflict your enemies with diseases, and so on. Um, And in a recent paper, Damian Williams, who's a philosopher of religion, compares the ambition to create a general purpose AI assistant with this practice of demonology. So he refers to spirits of the dead, angels in the Islamic tradition, genies, automata, the golem in Jewish traditions. These are all about making an artificial being that you then make do your bidding. Um, and he points out this is a very old ambition that people have to create an artificial servant of some kind, and that this is precisely what a lot of AI developers seem to want. They want to create an AI agent that will serve that will serve them and do whatever they say. And Williams points out, some of the same lessons from the mythology here are relevant, where um, a lot of the time the story takes a bad turn where the genie interprets a command a little too literally. Um, but and there's tons of writing about what happens if AI takes its instructions too literally and causes problems as it tries to fulfill them. Um, but the point I want to make from this is that there's this long continuity between artificial life, again, and a magical practice. And that kind of thinking about artificial life is exploited in the way that we talk about AI to make us think about it in a particular kind of way. Okay. Um, so talking about AI and illusion wouldn't be complete without talking about one of the most famous instances. This is an illustration of the original Mechanical Turk. It was it appeared in the 18th century. It was supposed to be a chess playing automaton, and people were encouraged to challenge it to a game of chess, and they were routinely astonished by how it was able to defeat them. It played a very good game, but it turned out that it was a trick. The hidden mechanism turned out to be a human being, a chess master, who was inside the machine and controlling all of its moves. And this, of course, is a kind of use of illusion that is happening with AI today as well. We can just think about cases of misinformation and misdirection where AI is used to scam people. This is a recent event from earlier this year in Glasgow, where it appears that somebody used AI to generate text and images to make it seem like there was a Willy Wonka family experience that was going to happen, and that was purported to have fun activities and stories and treats and so on. Turned out it was just a warehouse with a few poorly paid actors, a bizarre story about a chocolatier named Willie McDuff and an evil adversary called simply the Unknown. Um, it was such a fiasco that the police were called. Um, and this is just, one particularly silly example of charlatanry that AI enables. Um, it's again a kind of illusion um, that promises certain kinds of astonishing experiences, but in this case, it's transparent what the scam is once we have the bigger picture. So that's the kind of worst case scenario of being misled by these kinds of things, especially if we fall into this way of thinking about AI as a sort of magic. Um, so let's just sum up where we're at here. So there's this long association between artificial life and artificial thought with mystery, magic, and divinity. And that enables a kind of conceptual engineering in the technology space to happen, um, where the fact that a lot of the appeal of AI comes from its use of illusion um, gets exploited along with the confusion around what AI is and what it can do, such that we're encouraged to take up a kind of representational schema. Could be a concept, could be something more complex than that, um, where we associate AI with magical practices, where we maybe think about it as continuous with it. We think about AI as a kind of magic. Um, that allows the use of illusion in AI to be obscured, and it allows us to be kind of captivated by these things in a way that maybe we wouldn't otherwise. Now, illusion, though, is not necessarily a bad thing. Um, and I know I've spent a lot of time talking about, stuff like reasons to be worried about this way of thinking about AI. Um, but I'm not sure that it's entirely a bad thing to see it as a kind of magic. Um, and part of that goes back to the inspiration at the beginning for looking at ways in which AI and practices of illusion and magic are continuous, and that's stage magic. Randy, in his work to debunk psychic healers, um, reminds us that some illusion is harmless. If it's a stage magician up there who's capturing your attention, giving you some entertainment for a few minutes, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but there's something about the use of exactly the same techniques in different contexts that makes it a problem. That's because we can get fascinated, and that can make us vulnerable. So if AI uses illusion, and if we are thinking about AI as something continuous with illusion and magic, we need to understand when illusion is permissible. So that's the last set of thoughts that I want to talk through. Um, so we could try thinking we could try applying different kinds of normative frameworks to this. So um, I think going with a consequentialist account is going to be a non-starter, um, because on the one hand, it would allow any kind of illusion as long as there were good consequences. Um, that might, depending on how we interpret that, that might mean that, it'd be fine to deceive people using AI, say, making them think that GPT 4.0 actually is an intelligent being that has thoughts and feelings. Um, so long as that allows OpenAI to make tons of money, or that allows them to make technologies that benefit people. Um, so that would be a problem if we allowed any kind of illusion that had good consequences, even if it was deceiving people in the process. A consequentialist approach to the ethics of illusion is also going to be a problem because it might disallow certain kinds of illusions that have suboptimal consequences, but that we might think should still be permitted. So think about how there are all these AI companion applications that are out there now. Sometimes they're presented as romantic partners or best friends or pets. Um, and in most circumstances, it's going to be better for people to go out and find a real person or a real animal to fill those roles in their lives. But that doesn't mean that we should just disallow these kinds of technologies. There could be a way of using these that could be helpful, even if it's less good than the alternative of forming real relationships. Um, so I think that we want to find space where that's permitted and not just dismiss it because it's a suboptimal consequence. So what's actually ethically significant about illusion that I think consequentialism just kind of skips over is that it shapes our experience and thought. Um, and it's not the result of that, how it makes you act later, or what it means for you materially. It is the how it's affecting phenomenologically or cognitively, um, your experience of the world and how you're thinking about it. So I think a better approach to thinking about the ethics of illusion is to focus on autonomy instead. So we could ask, what makes a magic show ethically permissible despite the fact that it's misleading in some way? Well, it's because autonomy is preserved and maybe even enhanced by it. So um, there's a shared awareness of the nature of the activity amongst the performers and the audience. We all know none of this is real. and you have revocable consent to participate in the activity. If the magician points to you and says, "You, come on up, we're going to saw you in half," you can say no. And a good magician is going to allow you to just stay in the audience. Um, so that's what's important about what makes the kind of illusion in a stage magic show permissible, is it respects your choices, it respects your values, it allows you to decide how you're going to participate in this. And everybody is aware of what exactly it is we're here to do. Even so, the illusions, if well done, are powerful enough that you can still have a good time. It can still captivate you for a moment and astonish you in some ways. Um, so the principle that I want to propose is that illusion's permissible if it preserves or enhances participants' autonomy. When it comes to AI and some of the kinds of illusions that I was talking through, um, your autonomy would have to benefit or at least not be harmed by AI-based illusions for them to be permissible. So let's say, take another kind of magic that AI is purported to be able to do, that is necromancy. There's all these startups who are saying, give us your chat data with a deceased loved one. We'll create a simulacrum that you can talk to. It'll help you grieve. Um, that might genuinely help people with that process. Um, and if that helps them to reclaim some of their autonomy that they lost because of their grief in this situation, I think we should allow this kind of illusion to exist. We should allow people to participate in it, so long as it's very clear to everybody involved this is an illusion. This is not conjuring a spirit of the dead or anything. This is something that is fake, that can give you a certain kind of highly engaging experience that could be very valuable to you, but it's not real. And as soon as it becomes the sort of thing where it becomes difficult for someone to let go of, then it starts to undermine their autonomy. Then it's something that we need to be that is ethically concerning. So from this perspective, AI that does all kinds of different things that make use of techniques of illusion, that make use of ways of thinking about it such that it is continuous with magic, would be fine so long as we're not falling for the illusion, so long as we're not encouraged to think of it as something real. If we think about it more like a stage trick, where it's fascinating and exciting, but underlying all of that, there's some kind of trickery, then I think we're much closer to something that is a permissible way of using um, representations of AI that are presenting it as magical, that would be ethically permissible. So um, this would also support, and there's other writings about this. This would also support viewing uses of AI that are actively undermining people's autonomy, like using it to make decisions about sentencing based on recidivism model. Um, that directly undermines someone's autonomy. There's a kind of divination sort of illusion that happens with these kinds of models sometimes. And in those kinds of circumstances where someone's autonomy is being directly undermined by the use of this thing, then I think we can say it's straightforwardly wrong. Okay. Um, so to conclude, then, we've been encouraged to conceptualize AI as a kind of magic, and that leverages the fact that illusions are used in AI technologies to make them more captivating. Um, and it pulls on a very long history of connecting artificial life and thought with the magical. This is, I think, sometimes accidental, sometimes deliberate conceptual engineering by people in the tech industry because it serves their business interests primarily, but also because I think some of them have been captured by this way of thinking into believing that there actually is something kind of mystical that they're doing. Um, and I want to encourage us to think about this as continuous with illusion in particular, because not all illusion is a bad thing. Sometimes use of illusion, use of talking about something as if it's magical, serves useful purposes. Um, but it becomes a bad thing when it is autonomy undermining. And when we are talking about how to use AI and how to regulate it, it's when we're thinking about how illusion finds its way in here, when we're thinking about how we should even think about AI in the first place, um, using this notion of autonomy preserving illusions is where we should look to find some normative guidance. Thanks.